Hello, I'm Rick Harp, host of APTN News Brief, a daily podcast version of the nightly broadcast of APTN National News. Available on all major podcast platforms, APTN News Brief is your quick way to hear the headlines every weekday morning. Learn more at aptnnews.ca/podcasts.
We are APTN Investigates. On this episode,
the Canadian government has subsidized the high cost of food in the North for years, but consumers and experts are now questioning how the subsidy is used. I'm Brittany Guyot. Find out more on Food for Profit. These days, it doesn't matter where you go. At the end of the checkout line, everyone is feeling the pain.
Have you noticed prices go up?
I know, even here, nowadays, to shop $100, it's just a little bikeful.
Right, yeah.
Well, so a company needs some degree of profit.
Record profits more than you've ever made, ever?
While politicians grill the CEOs of the big grocery stores in the South, here, north of the 50th parallel, high prices are business as usual, where, for decades, one company has dominated the retail market.
For $1 billion company, I'd argue a lot of people in the South probably have never even heard of them.
I can tell you that they also received about $67 million in federal subsidy to sell food in those communities.
I think that it's so often in the North that we have so many issues that are talked about as insurmountable. We have a housing crisis, we have a water crisis, we have so many crises that we'll never get over or through them.
So we joined forces with the CBC's Fifth Estate to look into the high price of food in the North.
Does it make sense to you, though, that in that time, about 6 weeks, that even the pre-subsidy price would go up that high?
No, it doesn't. It should be the same, around the same, and it just doesn't make sense. Makes you ask more questions than anything.
Not only to look at the Northern Store's business practices, but also government accountability.
What we find when we review those measures are that there's no teeth.
I was hopeful. It felt like I could have changed something, but yeah, maybe it was just an illusion.
As well as pull back to question the status quo.
We're not going to solve food insecurity simply by having a retail subsidy program.
It doesn't feel right, but it's not surprising. That seems like that's how these things go. It's a big colonial game, you know? You play colonial games, you win colonial prizes. And that's what that is, right?
And finally, we shine a light on alternatives.
So this is what the Romaine looks like in its baby stage. It's just starting.
Alternatives to a system that prioritizes food for profit.
All the way around?
Yep. We'll probably just go straight up to the veggies there.
Nora Jean Omond likes to have a meal ready for whoever drops by. She says it's the way she was taught to do things here in Norway House, Manitoba.
Right. $13 for grapes.
I know, it's crazy.
She's prepping a hearty stew because 1, it's filling, and 2, it's cheap. But even meals like this are getting harder and harder to afford.
And these are double the price.
Yeah, wow.
$10. Can get them for $3.99.
Have you noticed prices go up?
I know, even here, nowadays, to shop $100, it's just a little bikeful.
Right, yeah.
Before I can fill up the cart before.
But for Omond and everybody else, those days are over.
I usually get the lowest price I can find.
Okay.
Because you have to economize.
$9.97.
Yeah.
With this package of beef, she hopes to feed 10 people with her stew. We'd show you the rest of the ingredients, but the no filming policy at the Northern Store is pretty strict.
Just got to let you guys know, unfortunately, we can't film in here without permission, okay?
But the no camera policy at the Northern Store hasn't stopped people from expressing their frustrations before.
Here's what $600 worth of groceries look like in Nunavut. Single bag, 2 average size boxes.
Especially during the pandemic, when prices skyrocketed. This video by Kyra Flaherty has been watched over 2 million times. It's part of a series of videos the Iqaluit-based Inuk posted under the handle Arctic Makeup.
Grocery store visit part 3.
Her goal? To shine a light on the cost of food in the north. While many of the comments offer support, some question why she's complaining, because that's the economics of shipping to a remote place. But is it really that simple?
It's so expensive just to survive, just to eat.
All right, welcome to Nora's cooking show. What are we doing here now?
We're gonna prep and we're gonna make a macaroni beef stew.
Okay. Back at Omen's, she puts us to work chopping onions. How is this for size? Is this okay? Okay.
That should be enough.
And we learn about the lengths she goes to make every dollar stretch.
I usually go to Flin Flon or Winnipeg, so like wherever I can go. Like I get food from there.
How far away is Flin Flon from here?
It's about 4.5 hours.
Ooh.
Depends how fast you drive.
That's a bit of a drive.
Yeah.
That's 4.5 hours each way. Winnipeg is almost twice that. It's a long way to go to get broccoli for $3.99. But if it means having food for when her grandkids or neighbors come around, it's worth it.
I'm an old age pensioner, and that's what I have to survive on. And at times that's all I have, like to feed them with. But I've learned to budget.
But nowadays, even those essentials that her grandparents counted on are getting expensive, especially if you live in the north. But the thing is, Norway House isn't that remote.
They don't have their shipments coming on a plane, and like it comes by. We have a all-weather road here that comes all the way here, and that's what I don't really understand, like why they would keep their prices so high.
David Swanson is a band counselor for Norway House Cree Nation. He says, forget driving to Flin Flon. Even shopping around for better prices in the community is a challenge.
A lot of our people don't have that opportunity or that option because they can't afford. They don't have rides. They don't have vehicles. And I'll be quite frank. You know, what sometimes we get offered or what's there is not the most healthiest of all. Displayed right as soon as you walk in, or the junk food, the potato chips, or the pop, and everything else that's not very healthy for you. And the healthy foods that we get are very expensive.
One thing that many people have trouble grasping is how distance isn't always a factor in prices. Recently, the Northern store in York Factory had pears that were $1.50 cheaper. It's a First Nation 460 kilometers north of Norway House. And for Swanson, it's frustrating to see non-essential items with more price consistency.
Like in Manitoba, you could buy a case of beer anywhere and it's the same price. You know, whether it's further up north in Churchill or down south in Morden, but you try to buy the same amount of milk in Churchill as you do in Morton, you pay probably 3 times, 4 times more in Churchill and also here in our house than you would down south.
So what are the factors that are making food prices so high? We teamed up with Stephen D'Souza of CBC's Fifth Estate to find out. All right, so let's take a look at this annual report. Now, it's impossible to talk about the cost of food in remote Indigenous communities without mentioning its biggest player, the Northern store.
Here we can see the sales overall for the year.
It says sales for the year ended in January 31st of 2023 and increased 4.6% to $2.3 billion. Anybody who's ever spent time north of the 50th parallel knows the Northern. Owned by the Northwest Company, their 129 grocery stores are found in 6 provinces and 2 territories.
Interesting here, it says Canadian operations accounted for 56% of total sales. So gross profits, $747 million. Here it says food sales accounted for 67%, about 68% of Canadian operations.
Add it all up, and the Northern makes hundreds of millions of dollars a year selling groceries in remote communities, many of whom are Indigenous.
For $1 billion company, I'd argue a lot of people in the South probably have never even heard of them.
Yeah, I mean, even when you do a simple Google search of the Northwest Company, a lot of people ask if it still exists. It does more than just exist. It's now a multinational entity that stretches from Alaska to the Caribbean. Aside from groceries, the Northwest has other businesses, from financial services to pharmacies to shipping, but their headquarters are still in Winnipeg, and their origins are part of Canadian history.
So this is the Hayes River route.
Paige Miswagen is a proud member of the Norway House Cree Nation. While giving us a tour of her community, she brought us to the old Hudson's Bay trading post.
So all the boats would come through here, come through this river, stop at the docks, and unload. And that's where it all went down, the trading post.
During the fur trade, the Northwest Company started as a rival to the Hudson's Bay Company. Formed in 1779, the Northwest Company made commercial headway into what is now known as Northwestern Canada. Eventually, the two competitors merged together, and from there, trading became retailing. And in 1987, investors bought out the Northern Retailing Division of the Hudson's Bay Company. In a nod to history, they named themselves the Northwest Company.
That's why the Northern store is right here, because it's an extension of the Hudson's Bay Company, right?
Despite being in Indigenous communities for hundreds of years, the Northwest Company has come under harsh criticism.
You look at the prices and just how much it costs, and then it's like that also feels like it says that you don't care about the people of the community.
In an emailed statement, the Northwest Company says they are committed to finding ways to offset the prices of food in the North. Here in Norway House, Miss Wagon used to work as a paramedic. It was an eye-opening experience.
We have pretty low rates of health. First Nations everywhere have low rates of health, and that's directly tied to diet and stuff.
Miss Wagon feels that the high price of healthy food in her community contributes to overall poor health outcomes.
So you go up around here and prices are high all the time, and it's so impactful to day-to-day life, as a consumer. We know through Northwest Company and Northern that they make insane profits every year. It doesn't feel right, but it's not surprising. That seems like that's how these things go. It's a big colonial game, You play colonial games, you win colonial prizes. And that's what that is, right?
But is it just a colonial game? Or the harsh reality of modern-day capitalism? Some might say it's something more sinister, because at the end of the day, taxpayers' dollars are being used to subsidize the high cost of food in the North through the Nutrition North program.
This money that the government is giving to be funded for Nutrition North is not always being put towards the food. So it doesn't carry all the way from the government to the freight to the consumer, so it stays in the pocket of the company.
Flaherty said that back in 2021. It's a sentiment that's been expressed by many who shop at the Northern, but is it true? A recent study confirms the suspicions of many.
I can tell you that they also received about $67 million in federal subsidy to sell food in those communities. That subsidy it appears to be contributing to their bottom line.
So tell me what we're seeing here.
And a former employee shines a light on how the Northern store sets its prices.
So there's no reason that the beans should have gone up from $5.49 to $11.39. The fact that the subsidy constantly is changing and there's always questions behind it, it makes you wonder what's actually going on.
APTN News presents a captivating journey into the heart of the North with our latest podcast, The Place That Thaws. The podcast is a unique exploration of the North, delving deep into the environmental challenges confronting the high Arctic.
Some areas that used to be safe are no longer safe.
Auyuituk, the place that never thaws. Except that now, it is thawing. Hosted by me, Danielle Parody. Join us as we uncover the intricacies of life on a changing coast. Experience the Arctic like never before. Subscribe and listen to The Place That Thaws, brought to you by APTN.
Really tender, that one.
Yeah.
In Iqaluit, Alexis Dodd helps keep elders fed. And if there's country food around, they're happy to share it with her.
You guys want some toast?
It may be her job, but she loves it. But before the 25-year-old worked at the Elders Society, she had another job at Iqaluit's North Mart.
So I was recruited as a financial administrative officer for the North Mart up north. So I would wake up, or I would have to go into work at 7 a.m. before the store opens, and we print out tickets from head office. They send batches, what we call, and it could be anywhere from 200 to 500, either price increases or decreases. It was typically more often a price increase than a decrease, but I'd have to get those out and onto the floor before the store opened.
Not long after, Dodd moved into a role where she saw how the prices of food changed over time.
I noticed there was consistent price increases of almost double, and I started mentioning that to head office, and head office started fighting back a little bit because it's not my job to question the pricing.
So Dodd started taking pictures, lots of pictures.
I took probably upwards of 500 photos over the time I was doing pricing and just in the store, and it's just because to me none of it made sense.
So tell me what we're seeing here. This is olive oil?
Yeah, so we're seeing the price increase. If you zoom in right here, the price was set originally on November 9th, 2022, and on December 31st, 2022, the price increase of almost $6 from $16.49 to $22.39.
And so that's just about 6 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Should a product like that increase that much in that time?
No.
And what do you think when you see this kind of price increase over that amount of time?
It makes you ask a lot of questions because you know that they aren't paying more for receiving their freight from down south. It's probably still the same cost from that vendor, so it makes you wonder why that cost has gone up so significantly.
Because this is olive oil, so it's a good that can hold for a long time.
100%,
right?
yes.
But it's not the only item Dodd noticed go up in price.
Here, let's take a look at this one.
Yeah, can you talk about how the dates here kind of tell a story?
Yeah, no problem. So on the bottom, that was the original price of $5.49 for beans. If you zoom in there, you can see that the original date was for September 21st, 2022. So that was just before Thanksgiving time. The price stayed the same for Thanksgiving, but typically around Christmas, people enjoy to eat beans. It's very easy because it's canned. And you can see they increased the price on December 12th, 2022 to $11.39. And that's right in time for Christmas, where people will be clearing out that shelf where they can make as much profit as they can.
Dodd also shared with us screen captures she took of how much items cost and how much North Mart charged. Here we see a 300-gram bag of Tim Hortons coffee will sell from anywhere between 40 to 80% profit.
The way that our system works for the pricing, I could see how much they were spending on each item and how much the freight cost to bring up each item, and it just never made sense how they could spend pennies on bringing items up but charge $15, $16 for the item. Because we are in the Arctic, the assumption is that freight costs are incredibly high, but when you buy in bulk, they're not. They're not. And we have sea lift for a reason.
The Northwest Company says shipping is only part of the cost of doing business. In a statement, they say higher utility rates, rent, and maintenance in the North all factor into higher prices in their stores. As for the olive oil, they say the increase was because the item was replenished using more expensive air transport. which is the only way to restock items in Iqaluit in the non-summer months. The federal government spends over $130 million a year to make certain food and items cheaper for folks in the north. In 2022, the Northwest Company received about $67 million of what is known as the Nutrition North subsidy. Dodd says it was not clear to her how the head office in Winnipeg applied the subsidies.
And I notice even the pre-subsidy price has changed. What does that mean?
So the pre-subsidy is how much it would cost you if it was not subsidized by the government. So apparently we're saving about just over $3 by getting it subsidized from the original cost.
Does it make sense to you, though, that in that time, about 6 weeks, that even the pre-subsidy price would go up that high?
No, it doesn't. It should be the same, around the same, and it just doesn't make sense. Makes you ask more questions than anything.
Dodd isn't the only one who has questions about how the Nutrition North subsidy is spent.
It appears that the retailer may be keeping the extra money.
Tracy Galloway is a health researcher and an associate professor at the University of Toronto. Last September, she co-authored a study that came to a sobering conclusion.
The amount of subsidy that was really being translated into lower prices was 67 cents on the dollar. So for every addition of $1 of subsidy funds by the federal government, the retailers were only passing on average 67 cents.
The study looked at over 100 northern communities from 2016 to 2019 and found on average 33 cents from every Nutrition North subsidy dollar did not go to the consumer. Northern retailers are required to pass along 100% of the subsidy to the consumers as a way to help lower the high cost of food in the north.
And that amount differed depending how much competition was in communities. So if there was even one more store in the community, pass-through was about 84 cents on the dollar. And if there was no competition, not another store in the community, the pass-through was 58 cents.
In 30 communities studied by Galloway, the Northern is the only game in town. Her study revealed the Northwest Company rarely has to compete with more than one store, meaning they have a near monopoly on groceries and retail above the 50th parallel. Like Dodd, Galloway says the Northern stores everywhere are constantly fluctuating their prices.
So people don't know week to week what the food prices are going to be, and they differ widely between communities, and it's really difficult for us to see why.
Galloway gives the example of two Nunavut communities, Igloolik and Hall Beach. They are located about 70 kilometers from each other, but prices are consistently higher in Igloolik.
You know, we can only speculate, but one of the reasons might be that incomes are higher, for example, in Igloolik. And if that's the case, that's deeply concerning. That prices would be different in two subsidized stores because of these market decisions made by retailers.
So you're saying, though, that retailers are seeing communities where people can afford to pay more, so then they're actually charging more?
Well, what I usually say is there's nothing in the current subsidy framework to prevent that.
What do you think about the fact that when we see parliamentary hearings in Ottawa, we see Metro, we see Sobeys, we see Loblaws, but we've never seen the Northwest Company there?
Well, I think that just sort of replicates an old habit of not thinking about the North.
And we'll now turn to Mr. Weston for up to 5 minutes, please.
Bonjour, and thank you, Chair.
Last year, the big grocery store CEOs were called to Parliament to testify about the rising cost of food.
At a time like this, when Canadians literally are saying that they are struggling, how much is too much then? Like for you, is there no limit to how much profit you can make? On the backs of Canadians that are struggling because they can't afford the groceries, there's no limit?
Reasonable profitability is an important part of operating a successful business.
So just how much did the big grocers make? 3 of the major grocers made anywhere from 3.6% to 11.7% more in profit. But the Northwest Company saw the highest percentage increase, with over 26%. So why weren't they called to testify? After numerous requests, the Northwest Company declined to be interviewed for this story. In an emailed statement, they say, "The Northwest Company unequivocally passes along 100% of all Nutrition North subsidies in our pricing." and further stating that the scientific process used by Galloway was flawed and inaccurate. Galloway says that if the Northwest Company wants to provide more data, she's all ears.
One thing we would say in the research community is we want to keep seeing those numbers, and we'd actually like more transparency in terms of the numbers. So it would help us evaluate whether retail stores are being compliant with the subsidy if we could see exactly what prices are for each retailer in each community.
Is there enough transparency? Are you getting enough information from the companies, from the government on the program?
The information that we get that's available on the Public Nutrition North Canada website, that information is in fact provided by the retailers themselves. That's where we get our data on the subsidy.
So, if the big grocers aren't profiting off inflation, who is? These questions take us to the farmers who are at the beginning of the supply chain. Leslie Kelly says for her, it's a way of life.
I grew up on a farm, born and raised. It's in my blood. I love this way of life. I love creating food from, a little seed that is grown at our farm but shipped across the world.
The fourth generation Saskatchewan farmer grows wheat, canola, and lentils, the same products that have seen a dramatic rise in cost. She says only a small portion of what customers pay in store makes its way to farmers' pockets.
Based on a loaf of bread, whether it's whole wheat or white, it could be 8 to 15 cents that a farmer like me would get out of that loaf of bread. Crop inputs, the fertilizer, the things that help with the disease pressure and weed pressure, those tools, and fuel. And also our equipment. The equipment prices have gone up as well, and land. So based on all of those things, our costs on the farm have gone up quite substantially.
Kelly says she'd love to be able to determine how much her wheat costs, but that's up to the market.
In order to have food, I need to make money. To see that in the grocery store, only getting 8 to 15 cents is a gut check.
As for Dodd, she's now made Iqaluit her home. As a result, she feels obligated to speak out.
I now have inundated myself into the community to do well for the community. The position that I'm in is only to serve other people. I'm not here to benefit out of myself. I'm here to do well by them.
The price of one item in particular upsets Dodd: baby formula, which can go for more than $65 a case.
There are situations where people can't breastfeed their kids and they rely on that formula, and more often than not I see people asking for people to donate formula because they can't afford it. I would see formula stolen often. Those cases that have like the bottles in them, they would be open more often than not.
More than anything, she says she would like to see more accountability.
Don't just hand out money to anybody thinking that they're going to do right. You have to follow up and see what's going on with it.
So what mechanisms are in place to ensure the Nutrition North subsidy is fully passed to the consumers? We take these questions to those who run the program.
If the auditors find that the retailer in question is not compliant, they will let us know and we will take corrective action.
As well as speak to someone who tried to change things from the inside.
When I would try to raise things, it would just kind of be steamrolled or just pushed aside and ignored, and or some kind of fluff answer would be given as to why we can't have projects or have the subsidy look differently than it does today.
Hi, I'm Dennis Ward, host of Face to Face. Coming up on our next episode, I'll be sitting down with Dean Janvier of Deloitte Canada. We'll be discussing the work he's doing on the $23 billion child welfare compensation package, economic development, and much more. Tune in Tuesday on APTN or listen to the Face to Face podcast for an extended interview. Download and subscribe on your favorite player.
Look at that, they're so perfect. They are very perfect. And I've never seen this kind of apple before, definitely not in Nunavut anyways. Each one, like it's like a commercial.
The produce may be nice, but grocery shopping in Toronto these days is not cheap. But when you're from Nunavut, everything here feels like a steal.
For families that have young children, they'll go through a lot of milk, right? And it's so expensive, like get these bags. It's only $10.
Originally from Iqaluit,
wow, there's so many options already.
Beth Kochik has also spent time in Montreal and Ottawa before settling in Toronto.
Oh, okay. Wow. I have never seen all these different pops. Oh my God.
When you're an Inuk from the south, bringing cheaper food home to the north is more than encouraged. It's expected, except it doesn't always go as planned.
One time I was living down south and I went up for the holidays to Iqaluit, and I brought a frozen turkey in my carry-on, and I had one in my suitcase. But my suitcase got lost, my luggage got lost, and so at least we had one turkey, and we were able to cook that one turkey. But then a couple weeks later, the other turkey showed up, and I didn't tell them to keep it frozen. So it had thawed, and it had rotted. Oh my God, yes.
Tales of makeshift food importing like this aren't that uncommon for Northerners. Those tales are told to get a laugh. Because sometimes the only other option is to scream.
I think that it's so often in the North that we have so many issues that are talked about as insurmountable. We have a housing crisis, we have a water crisis, we have so many crises that we'll never get over or through them. And that's just not true. Like, that can't be true. There's a solution to every problem.
In the interest of finding solutions, Kochik used to be on the Nutrition North Advisory Board. Board members are expected to provide guidance on how to most effectively put the subsidy to use. But she says it didn't really work that way.
I was hopeful. It felt like I could have changed something. But yeah, maybe it was just an illusion. When I would try to raise things, it would just kind of be steamrolled or just pushed aside. Some kind of fluff answer would be given as to why we can't have projects or have the subsidy look differently than it does today.
Kochik says that while some people at the program are open to new ideas, there were just as many interested in maintaining the status quo.
So I found that there was a lot of support, but at the same time there was others that felt like they were obstructionist, I would say, that would find reasons, no matter what they were, to say, no, this isn't possible.
She points to colonialism as the reason for the Arctic's food insecurity, and history backs her up. From the mid-1950s to the 70s, the RCMP slaughtered tens of thousands of sled dogs in Inuit communities.
We were no longer mobile, and we relied on them for hunting. So there was a significant decrease in our traditional hunting practices, and a spike in food insecurity as a result. And this also forced us into wage economy, into the system of capitalism that we have today. So we could no longer rely on our traditional systems. We had to rely on store-bought food, and we had to get jobs in order to have money to then buy that food.
The colonial idea of importing everything from the South is embedded in the history of food subsidies for the North. Before the Nutrition North's creation in 2011, the subsidy was known as the Food Mail Program. Food transportation by air was subsidized for 50 years by purchasing freight through Canada Post.
The decision was made at the time to move to a retail subsidy because it was felt that the old subsidy working through Canada Post was stifling competition in northern communities.
It's been 13 years since the Nutrition North program was created to help make groceries more affordable for Northerners. According to Tracy Galloway's research, retail competition is still weak. The health researcher published another study in 2017, and the results were concerning.
What we actually found was not only did food insecurity go up after the implementation of Nutrition North Canada, which is, totally not what it was supposed to do, but fruit and vegetable consumption went down. And part of the reason for that is people cannot afford fruit and vegetables, and those are subsidized items.
You know the old saying, I'm from the Government of Canada, I'm here to help.
Wayne Walsh is the Director General of Northern Strategic Policy for the Minister of Northern Affairs. He oversees the Nutrition North program.
Food insecurity is a really complex issue that has a lot of different considerations and factors.
Walsh is familiar with Galloway's work that shows 33 cents of every subsidy dollar is not going to the consumer. He says they're looking into it.
If the auditors find that the retailer in question is not compliant, they will let us know and we will take corrective action.
With regards to the Northwest Company, third-party auditors hired by Crown Relations did not find any significant issues with how the subsidy was applied. However, the auditor was unable to travel to northern stores for their last audit due to the pandemic. And because competition is weak, Galloway says it's hard for Nutrition North to enforce the subsidy from being spent incorrectly.
The program has a few accountability measures, so retailers are subject to some periodic audits. What we find when we review those measures are that there's no teeth, right? There aren't punishments, there's no threat that a retailer will be removed from the program, because ultimately that would have a negative effect on consumers in a place that would further lessen competition in these remote northern communities.
Korchik says the amount of subsidy money being passed down to the consumers was discussed by the advisory board, but adds that in her 2 years there, no action was ever taken.
About every meeting, we're talking about it. We're trying to find ways for it to be more transparent and more accountable. And it really felt like it was just being put off.
A 2022 briefing note to the Minister of Northern Affairs shows some of the advisory board's tensions. It mentions how Pita Atami, leader of Nunavut Inuit in northern Quebec, wants more oversight of how audits are done. But the chairperson and vice chairperson of the advisory board said that it would be, quote, redundant.
I think the Nutrition North program is working to the extent that it was designed to do so.
Walsh says that Nutrition North is looking into being more effective. But an internal memo obtained from an access to information request shows how the program struggles with unintended consequences. The memo outlines how at the start of the pandemic, they increased subsidy rates for air transport of food items, but not for the normally cheaper option, the sea lift. As a result, retailers started shipping almost everything by air, costing the program significant amounts of money that could have been used to address food security in other ways.
There's a lot of factors that play a role in it, including poverty, including economic development, lack of infrastructure. We're not going to solve food insecurity simply by having a retail subsidy program.
However, Korchik says that the Nutrition North program is still too focused on subsidizing items from the south, instead of finding possible solutions in the north.
Not like any industry would just out of their goodness of their heart, lower prices or anything. That's not how companies are organized. That's not the intention behind them. I understand that our food insecurity problems are really a problem of food sovereignty, and this stems from the history of colonization in the north.
But Korchik isn't the only one looking for northern solutions.
What we're hoping to do is actually work together and pool our resources so we're able to actually buy wholesale and then deliver those products in our First Nations.
The dill is really growing. These need to be harvested, actually.
And others have decided to take matters into their own hands.
So this is what the romaine looks like in its baby stage. It's just starting.
I'm Kathleen Martins, a reporter with APTN News.
Homeless, houseless, shelterless people, they aren't hard to find in Winnipeg. They're on the sidewalks, in bus shelters, and down alleyways. They're living in tents and squatting in empty buildings. They're even sleeping in abandoned cars. But who are they? Hear their stories in my new 5-part podcast called Our Relatives. Listen on your favorite player.
In Cree, this land is called Kinoseo Sipi. It means fish river. These waters have helped feed Swampy Cree for generations.
Norway House is located mouth of Lake Winnipeg. And so we're along the Nelson River. It's very beautiful. The sunsets are awesome because most of the houses are located along the shore or along the rivers of Norway House. Like for instance, you can still see the sunset. So it's beautiful.
But since the arrival of settlers, a different way of food gathering has emerged. It's one Nora Jean Oman says is getting hard to maintain. As far as Oman is concerned, she's just carrying on a family tradition of making do.
Yeah, I watched my grandparents make a meal out of nothing. They can have a few potatoes and vegetables and a chunk of meat, and they can feed a whole family.
Okay, we're getting to Papanicus Point.
So these are your old paramedic stomping grounds?
Yes.
Paige Miswagen has spent most of her life here. She loves it, even with its challenges.
Well, here we have pretty low rates of health. First Nations everywhere have low rates of health, and that's directly tied to diet and stuff. Diabetes is through the roof.
When she worked as a paramedic, Miswagen would drive the streets of Kinoseo Sipi in an ambulance, crisscrossing the community, responding to crisis after crisis.
And you would see a young person, 30, 40-year-old, that had 10, 12 medications dealing with diabetes, heart disease, all these different issues, very common issues. Turns out at the base of that hierarchy of needs is food, water, and health, physiological basic needs. And from my lived experience and working as a medic and seeing the inside of other people's homes, I realized that we don't have that.
Miswagen saw a need and made a career change. Now her job is to help grow healthy food.
So this is what the romaine looks like in its baby stage. It's just starting. The mature ones of those plants are these. This is what they look like. They're pretty much ready.
Miswagen works at the Norway House Grocer, a converted shipping container that serves as a hydroponic farm.
Once the plant is ready, we'll take it out, pull it out, keep the roots attached as much as we can. And when we're packaging, we grab the roots, just wrap it up, and it'll be packaged with the roots still attached.
From there, the produce is either sold right out of their location or for delivery to places like the local hospital and the Helen Betty Osborne School kitchen.
Right now we're going into the HBO's Culinary Arts Kitchen. The spinach is the bomb.
Miswagen bursts with pride when it comes to the quality of her produce.
Okay, now we got this one. These ones are my faves. Kale. Nice big heads of kale.
But there's one place in town that's not as interested in the grocer's produce. The Northern, even though they share the same parking lot.
They tried to carry our products in the store, and the profit margins just for them on their business side just they didn't like it, I guess.
In a statement, the Northwest Company says they stopped carrying the grocer's produce because it did not have adequate yield to continue selling in the northern stores. But after APTN's inquiry, they reached out to the Norway House Grocer and began talks to once again stock their produce.
We'll take one of the seedlings, gets put in the tray, water flows through, feeds the roots, and the plant grows.
So here's an example of the pak choy.
The grocer also employs Miss Wagon's father, Ian Maxwell.
Had to scrunch it up a little bit, get it in the bag.
A former school teacher and Northern employee. He says the grocer is easy to run.
It shows a lot of hope for a lot of people that don't have the background, the scientific background, botany level background, that they think they might have to have in order to run something like this. It's not necessary.
It's also not without its challenges. In cold northern climates, it needs a lot of electricity, which gets expensive. Mainly funded by the Band Council, the Norway House grocer is currently not profitable.
Sage smells really good, love it.
But Miss Wagon says being profitable is not the point.
The young people who are going to school, it's so vital to them to have like nutritious, healthy food, meals available so that when they go to school, they can learn and feel good and grow and be healthy. The further north you go, the more preservatives and stuff need to be put into food to survive the trip up here when you're talking about like fresh produce and stuff, right? And a lot of times that means you have to get produce that isn't necessarily the best, or it has things in it or on it that aren't good for consumption, you know, over a long term. So if there is food and produce that's available in the community, that's always going to be the best option for our people.
The grocer isn't the only one putting profits aside to improve northern food security. This past December, Winnipeg hosted the signing of the Witchy-Waymagoon Partnership.
We all are here for one reason, is to actually benefit the people that we service in terms of providing the basic necessities of life.
The partnership unites the Northern First Nations of Ontario and Manitoba under one goal: to make their nations more food secure by increasing their buying power.
What we're hoping to do is actually work together and pool our resources so we're able to actually buy wholesale and then deliver those products in our First Nations.
Dave Negan is the executive director of an Indigenous-run employment and training center in Thunder Bay. By having First Nations team up with food banks and other organizations, Negan sees an opportunity to address one of the main causes of food insecurity.
What this will allow us to do is that instead of paying for one load flowing up to, let's say, Martin Falls First Nation, for example, that we're able to pay for a number of them, and then that will allow us to actually bargain and negotiate for cheaper cost of freight to our First Nations.
The Witchy-Waymagoon Partnership says by joining forces, they could increase food security for around 120,000 people in 43 northern communities. They also expect it will be good for local economies, and their plan has the financial support of Nutrition North.
The best solutions are the ones that are driven by the communities. I think it's imperative that we listen to what community and community members are saying, and make sure that people have the tools that they need in order to address those priorities.
Walsh says he thinks the partnership has the potential to achieve one of the subsidy's main goals: increase grocery competition in the north. Meanwhile, the Norway House Band Council is not against a for-profit model. They just want it done differently.
Local people that are wanting to start up a business, and automatically they're facing a giant that's got the monopoly on anything and everything. So it's not fair practice. Rather than depending on outside companies to come and set up businesses here, and we are looking at having our own grocery store.
Actually, in my family, we have a saying: cheese is gold. When there was cheese in the house, we would all be like so excited and we would like get together to eat it, you know?
But as much as Beth Kochek would love to have cheaper cheese in the north, she would like to see more outside-of-the-box thinking when it comes to the Arctic.
We need to support hunting and food production in the north as an industry in and of itself. So that to me looks like supporting hunters the way that we support farmers in the South. And respect them as a food producer, right? Instead of shipping in food from thousands of miles away, we would have local organic food from our community members. If we were to be able to provide salaries for hunters, it actually eliminates that problem, because then they would just be able to go out, hunt, provide for themselves and their families, and then also come back and share the food freely, right? Which would be in line with our worldview as Inuit.
Kotiark recently resigned from the Nutrition North Advisory Board. One reason she mentioned is cutbacks to a grant used to support Inuit hunters. The same grant is now being used to partially fund the Witchy-Wemigoon Partnership.
So when I had first started, they did start the Harvester Support Grant, and I believe at the time, or maybe just before, there was a $8 million budget. And then that was raised to $40 million. And now that will be going back down to $8 million at the end of the fiscal year.
The sources of food insecurity in the North are abundant and complex, but possible solutions do exist. The next question is not only how will they be implemented, but by who?
Sometimes they all come out at once, and yeah, it's challenging. Yeah, to try and feed them.
But until then, folks like Nora Jean Omond will just have to make do when it comes to feeding their grandkids. Scrimping, saving, and driving for hours to make those dollars and cents stretch just a little bit further.
Thanks for listening to this story. If you'd like to hear more from Investigates, visit aptnnews.ca/podcasts. You can watch APTN Investigates every Friday on APTN. Visit us on social media and catch up on our stories at aptnnews.ca, the APTN News YouTube channel, and the APTN News app. The Investigates team includes reporters Brittany Guyot, Christopher Reed, and Kenneth Jackson, and video journalists Rob Smith and Tom Fenario. I'm Josh Grummett, and I'm an associate producer for the show. Our producer is Colin Crozier, and our executive producer is Paul Barnsley. Members of the APTN National News team also contribute to many of our stories. Once again, thanks for listening.